Hello, loves. I just finished recording the interview you are about to listen to with Gary Norian. Gary Norian is the piano player at my church, Unity Church of Houston. And back in 2007, he released an album called Be Revealed. And if you look for the album on Spotify, it's going to come up under the name Ken Gayle. That is the performer on the album, the singer on the album. And Gary Norian wrote almost all of the songs on the album. And so I, for years, have wanted to pick his brain about this album because it has created so many meaningful moments in my life. Just some of the different songs and the times that they've come up, either, you know, at church when I've gone or just when I've listened to the album. I've had profound moments of expansion, of feeling understood, of release, just very, just some meaningful moments. And um, yeah, it was just an honor to get to finally pick his brain. And I really encourage you all to listen to the album. We're going to link to it in the show notes on Spotify and probably on Amazon. And there are some really, really beautiful, fun, full of wisdom pieces of music on there, and I hope that if you get half as much out of that album as I have gotten, it will be well worth your time. So enjoy my interview with Gary Norian. All right, so I'm officially starting our interview now, and one of the reasons I'm so excited and nervous to talk to you is years ago I started this podcast, and the first year that I did it, I didn't even do interviews. But when I started the podcast, I was like, someday I might do interviews, and I really want to interview Gary Norian. Like, you were literally the first person that came to mind that I wanted to
Oh my
talk
goodness.
to. So this has been a bucket list thing, and now we're here and we're doing it.
Excellent. Sounds great.
Yeah. And so I know very little about you. So would you just introduce yourself to me and to the podcast? Like, who are you? What do you do? And yeah.
Okay, well, today I am husband and parent. So I have been married for it'll be 25 years coming up on October 31st of this year.
Wow.
Yes, and I have a 17-year-old daughter who's graduating high school this year. So we're in the midst of the college process. So that's where I am in my life in terms of those items. I've been a pianist musician for as long as I can remember. So I currently, most of what I do is teach right now. So I have a large stable of private students, and I've been doing that for probably about 22, 23 years. And I also just took a adjunct faculty position at UH, teaching jazz piano there. I obviously play piano and do musical duties at Unity Church. I've been doing that since roughly 1999, 2000 when I moved to Houston. And then, so the background before that, I lived in Chicago. I came down here in 2000, summer 99, 2000 with my wife, met up in Chicago. While I was there, I was playing in the jazz scene. I wrote music for jingles for TV and radio, so a little bit of what we'd call the jingle scene or the studio music scene up there. Um, and prior to that, I'd done sowed my wild oats playing in bands and touring and things like that. But all to bring us up to where I am today, primarily teaching, occasionally a private performance, but mostly it's teaching and the Unity work.
Well, talk to me about your relationship with spirituality.
Okay, so that small topic. Um,
Yeah.
I would say that I think I've always had an inkling. I grew up in a kind of a, I would say, conservative Reform Judaism, Jewish household. So we partook of the traditions and all that, and a lot of that was more family centered. We'd spend holidays with family members, and we'd go to synagogue for the high holidays. I did have a bar mitzvah. So, but I think at that age, it was more, there wasn't much of a connection as opposed to the cultural connection going through the rituals and uh, uh, moments in your life when that would come into play. But wasn't until I would say late high school, early college, where I started thinking that maybe that wasn't not the complete answer. Not that it couldn't have been if I had pursued it in Judaism, but as it was presented to me, um, there was like a ceiling on the depth, and it seemed more doing these rituals. So that led me to, I would say in my early 20s, uh, just looking to see beyond what I had learned. Was there something else? And in that process, I was exposed to, Eastern philosophy, so Buddhism, and then a little bit of a mix with, contemporary physics and how those things, in so much as I was able to understand that. But I did read a lot of books that kind of covered those two angles. And then when I moved to Chicago after being on the road, I had a friend who I was at his house on his piano. There was a book by a Buddhist monk that seemed very interesting. So I went out and bought that book, and that led me into a real deep search. And I was definitely searching for why these things had become popular throughout the centuries. And in my search through that, I also was in the bookstore looking for Buddhist books, and then right next door to that section was a number of books on Christ. I was like, you know what? When I was growing up, it was kind of, you never really talked about it. Jews did
Yeah.
not talk about Jesus. And I was like, well, it seems to be kind of a common thing that people would talk about. So on my own, I did some research into that, and number of books. So it was just a lot of reading and intaking information, and through that, I was able to kind of see how at the core of these world religions, there was a connection that was beneath the dogma and rhetoric, and even just words themselves. Uh, and so from there, that just kind of like took its own path towards the non-dual aspect of all those religions. And I think that's where I kind of settled. I felt like I'm not this seeker anymore, but that it's those things kind of make sense, and it gives me a way to, through that understanding, look at the world and relationships and things that happen to me and for me and from me. It's an understanding that allows me to kind of process the world. So that's,
Yeah.
if that makes sense, not
It
necessarily
does.
linear.
No, well, nothing ever is.
Yes.
Um, I'm I'm curious. What I know most about you is the music that gets played at Unity Church,
Hmm.
some of which you wrote. And so for me, I my brain has you associated with music and spirituality being very intertwined. So I'm curious if how much of that resonates for you. Is it intertwined some of the time? How long has it been? Is it not a thing?
Well, I would say that it's always intertwined no matter what. I
Mm.
did not consider that it was intertwined until, later in life. And it might have been into my 30s or so when I was kind of starting to settle into how things were for me, spiritually speaking. So prior to that, I think, and I teach, so I know that there's especially in not just learning music to read, but I teach jazz and creative music. So there's this seeking of knowledge for music and vocabulary, and be able
Mm.
to do this and do that and play this and understand this in theory. And an accumulation of information. Um, and then you're trying to execute it and apply it so you can show what you've learned. And there's an underlying spiritual aspect to that anyway. But usually at that moment, you're not thinking about that. You're just, can I play this? Can I learn this? Can I show, can I put a song together? And there's parts that go together, and there's tools that go into it. So it is very up here, um,
Mm-hmm.
and of course up here is here, but only if you recognize it. But for that moment, and it's a pursuit. So I think it had always been like that. Um, so uh, as the spiritual side of it kind of to start aligned for me, I started to realize that it wasn't my brain that was generating these ideas because
Mm.
there's nothing there. Got to come from somewhere. Okay, so it's like, oh, these
Right.
ideas are coming to me, and I noticed that the harder I tried, the less creative I was. And I would notice that in jazz performances where it's on the spot and you're having to be creative. That the more I was thinking about it, and this is like everybody in jazz knows this. Like the harder you try, now you have to have the theory, you have to have your knowledge base, but the harder you're thinking about it, the less you are available to actually be creative and let your knowledge and um, muscle memory flow through you to become art at the moment. So became recognized. I started to recognize that, and it was easily 15, 20 years before over and over again, I was like, why is it that when I think about it, it sucks, and then when I'm like not thinking about it, it's great. It was a surprise when it was great, even in writing or anything. So that idea kind of crystallized to me that there's something operating that it's through me, and obviously you have to have the knowledge and the information to process what's coming through you. But there's a fine line and a balance to being open to what's coming in, whether you're writing or you're spontaneously playing in a group or by yourself. Where the minute you try to force it, you lose contact with what's coming through you. So it's a tightrope. It's a little bit of back and
Yeah.
forth. So to me, it was just recognition of that, and then working at Unity. Uh, the challenge was I decided that it would be I wanted to write some songs that encapsulated those teachings. So
Mm-hmm.
the writing process itself, again, if you're putting puzzle pieces together, and but the ideas that kept coming, I was like, oh, it's coming, and there's a natural kind of feeling to that. So
So I want to affirm something that you said, and then I want to dig into the writing.
okay,
So just yesterday, I had a mediumship reading, and when I wasn't trying, it was just minutes before the mediumship reading, I was getting all this insight into the experience that my client was having before I'd even talked to them because I just wasn't trying. I was like doing my dishes, preparing
yeah,
for the reading.
yeah,
Then the reading starts, and I try to connect, and it's like crickets. And then finally, like we work our way, it's fine. But then later something came up, and I was like, oh my gosh, all those things that came through while I was just doing the dishes, I sort of thought because they came so easily to me that I was just making it up and I was like
yeah,
projecting what was going to happen in this reading.
yeah,
But no, sure enough, it was just spirit was like, "Oh, you're ready. Like let's
yes,
go."
yeah,
So it's the same in my work as it is, it's just fascinating.
yeah. It is.
So the revealed album, and do you have other songs than what's on the revealed album that's just not on a CD, or are those all the songs that you've written?
No, I would say. Well, I mean, I write in a lot of different styles. So, and
Yeah.
I'm not a very prolific songwriter. So if I'm sitting down to write a
Okay.
song, I mean, I put a lot of pressure on myself. Like it's got to be a
Yeah.
masterpiece. So I'm not like I have friends and students who just are so prolific. They write so many songs. They're just great with words, and so for me,
Right.
it's more of a labor to turn the idea into a full blown song and have a
Yeah.
message. And so that was a group, and then after that, I would say maybe there's another 15, 20 that came out of it that were never recorded that we'll do at Unity. But that core
Yeah.
group was the I had a number of points I wanted to cover, and
Yeah.
those were them.
So this album, for those that are listening to the podcast, the album came out in 2007, but some of the songs were probably performed at Unity leading up to that. I have I have two vivid memories of I want to look at my notes, make sure you have a song, I think it's the first song on the album called When Your Love Shines Through Me. The first time I heard it, I remember thinking, this is everything. Like, this is, yes, like, this is so true. Like, I was like, how have I not heard this before? And then the second time I heard it, my first thought was, I wish I had written this. Like, it's just so good. I wish I had written it. And before I could even like finish that thought, it just, that song can, if you're open and you're ready for it, or at least for me, it shifts me into a state of bliss, a specific, I don't want to call it bliss because it's grounded. But it's this embodied bliss of remembering the experience that that we can have while we're here. It's so powerful in such a joyous way. You know, like there's other songs and even on this album that are powerful in a way that they are healing and that they're cathartic.
Mm-hmm.
But that song, I just wish I had written it. I can't think of a better way to describe what it means to be a human, have like a divine being having a human experience
Right, right.
that we forget about our like the whole just, and then you have this whole other album of good songs. Like it's wild to me.
Well, thank you.
So I mean, I have notes on like half the songs on here of the memories that I have of hearing them and sitting and getting up and dancing and just there's, I don't know if it's you being the puzzle pieces and letting them come in, or if it is like I don't know what your creative process is, but it works.
Well, thank you.
It
That's so
just
nice.
works.
Well, I'll tell you
Yeah.
that also when I hear a song I like that I didn't write, that's my first thought. I wish I wrote that.
Yeah.
How
I
come I
wish I
didn't write
wrote
that?
that.
Right. It's
Yeah.
like, oh, what a great, yeah. So that's usually my benchmark for songs that I like as well. So
Yeah.
the reason I wanted to do that recording, write those songs, I think it was at a time when Howard Caesar, who was the minister at the time, was starting to talk a lot about. I mean, in his own journey, he had gotten into the kind of the non-dual, and he never qualified it as non-dual, but he used the word oneness. And the direction of his lessons were going in that direction. Well, the direction was going toward that concept and that idea, and articulating in so many different ways. This is just it's like you're trying to describe something that is beyond words. So there's always that leap you have to
Yeah.
make, and that was aligning with the things that I was discovering and learning and working on in my own world. So, and we had this great set of singers, and Ken was just coming on board. The music in the New Thought world. This is, I don't mean to disparage the music in the New Thought world, but if you compare the emotional impact that music in like contemporary Christian or gospel,
Mm-hmm.
where you can say things that don't necessarily align with unity principles, or just words, blood and the cross, and like there's an emotional impact with that music that is
Right.
very powerful for those who are listening. Okay, so with Unity, the music
Right.
it tended to be borrowed from pop music that kind of got close to a message, or Christian
Uh-huh.
contemporary music that we changed some lyrics, and there was never an impact that I felt could be there. So the
Right.
challenge to myself was: is there a way to say these things, which are deep principles? It's not just like I believe. Well, that's, you could say that, but it doesn't take you anywhere. Okay, maybe with a great groove and a great beat and powerful chords, it's going to feel like something, but does it really go anywhere? So my challenge was: is there a way to take these ideas and have put them into a format that would have a rise and a fall and the trajectory of emotional in the same way that any good song would have. So that was my challenge to myself, and to take these principles and the ideas And to me, every song, the way I thought of it, and I guess it's kind of, I think any good song has to start with just a simple idea. So the idea for me was I had a revelation or realization about something, like boom, okay, I understand this thing now, or this is it's taken hold in my life, and then turn that tiny little idea into a beginning and a middle and an end and a chorus that can be repeated. That you know, the chorus, when the chorus comes up, it impacts what happened in the verse, and then there's a second verse, and then the next chorus impacts and reveals what happened in the previous, and then there's other sections. So they all start with a realization, and then making it sort of blossom into what would be a song that had a beginning and a middle and an end, and hopefully an emotional impact to the listener, which would be me first because I
Yeah.
was the one. So I had, you know, as a writer, my filter is high. If it's cheesy, is it am I getting closer? That you really nail it. So a lot of filtering. I still have the book of lyrics, and it would be like page one notes, page two coming together, page three everything crossed out, page and it would usually take 6 to 8 pages before it turned into this thing where it's just like no erasing, no marks, and then I knew that
Mm.
the lyrics were in place, and so it was always out of a small core idea blown out into uh, uh, what would turn into the song itself.
So I think you've kind of already answered this question, but I want to ask it more explicitly. So when you're writing these songs, who are you writing for? And like, did you always have an album in mind, or were you just like starting to write songs because you saw that there was a need?
Um, I, I did. It was both. I wanted to write individual songs that would be a collection. So that was kind of like
Yeah.
the timing of um, um, meeting Ken coming on board at the church, and I had a friend who was I was working with already in a recording studio, and it just kind of things started to align. So I kind of it all came together. The idea was, hey, I'm going to write a number of songs that cover these varying, and I didn't make a list of topics. I just knew that at some point
Right.
I'd kind of be finished. Um,
Yeah.
Meaning, my goal is I want to say everything I have to say about this, and not leave, at least personally, and not leave anything unsaid, without too much overlap or redundancy, and not without leaving anything out that might be like, oh, that's a big thing you just left out, Gary. So you should. So it just kind of seemed like it
Right.
was going to be over at a certain point. So I just kept writing until that also fills about 70 minutes, of a CD. So there's a little bit of
Yeah.
that. So um, in terms of who I was writing for, it was I was trying to write at the same time for me as if I was writing to myself, but also that so that the subject could be that when you say I or me or you, it's not the personal I or me or you. Okay, I was the closest it got to.
Mm.
Um, I think when you say you and you're speaking of God or spirit, and even that's like because then it's no longer non-dual because you're assigning a pronoun or a name to something else. Okay, so
Right.
but for the sake of art and but then that could also be like someone could sit and listen to that who is not tuned into oneness or anything and think that could be my dad or that could be God or that could or like the song "Let Me." I remember that one. I wanted that to be sung as if it was sung from spirit or from God, but it could be a mother to a child.
Mm.
So I wanted to have multiple. Um, uh, what's the word? Uh, the one who's speaking and the one who's listening. I wanted to have multiple variations where those things would connect, so that it wasn't. So there was no need to know who it was, who was speaking or who was listening. That it could
Yeah.
apply to everybody, if that makes sense.
It it totally makes sense. And it's interesting. So let me we it was sung at church, I don't know, weeks ago, within the last few months.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and of course, I've heard the song before, but there was something, and it was one of those days where like, I'm happy, I'm going to church, everything's fine. It's not like I had something on my heart and mind at the time that I knew was like heavy in some way. But there was something about that morning where Ken Gayle started singing Let Me, and it just hit me that there was some stuff that I was carrying that I didn't have to carry. You know, like sometimes I think as humans we take things on
Right.
that we can't even control anyway, but we
Yeah.
just sort of carry them around as if we can.
Right.
And I just started crying, like with not with sadness, but it was just like I get to release this now.
Yeah.
And just the invitation of let me, whatever, there's different
Right.
lyrics. I just was like, great. I will let you like, and it's powerful that music can do that, but it only does that when somebody like you creates it that way.
Well,
When the lyrics have the meaning and they have the depth. Because I think you're right, you know, in New Thought churches, sometimes it's like, well, let's just find a pop song that's inspiring because we don't want to be too dogmatic. And
right.
oh my gosh, just the invitation to healing that is in some of your songs is so powerful. And sometimes there are times when like I'm not in a place where I necessarily need it or resonate with the message that day, but I can feel somebody else in the audience having a moment.
Sure.
And then because I understand it so well, because the songs are so timeless, that it's like I can just hold space for like what that experience is. I feel
Thank
like
you.
each of these songs is like an archetype in my ongoing spiritual relationship. Um, what was the other song I was going to bring up? Let Me was one of them. Your song I Am Loved, which we often use at church as like leading into the
Hmm.
meditation. Um, I love to sing that song at nighttime, and my kids don't let me sing at nighttime anymore. That lasted for like 2 weeks, but I sing it in my mind.
Okay.
Um, it's it just feels like truth. It, you know, like it's not like you uncovered some great mystery. All you're doing is telling me the truth of what I already know to be my experience, but nobody
Right.
else has put it into words that way.
Right. Right.
And it's so helpful to repeat that for myself. And it in that case where this road will lead me home, it just it centers me, it brings me, it calms me. It That's one of the archetype songs of like come back to the spiritual perspective.
Hmm.
You know, come
Yeah.
back to peace, come back to the spiritual
Right.
perspective. Um, just holy cow.
Well, thank you. Well, I think
Yeah.
that the word archetype is probably, I, I guess that would be, if you're looking at all the facets that make up that collection of songs. I think that's probably a good word to use. I don't know if I was thinking along the lines, but hearing you say it makes, yeah, makes perfect
Yeah.
sense. And really, for me, the test that those songs, before it went out for anybody to listen to, it had to work for me. So I think
Yeah.
no cheesiness. I mean, it's like very, very careful to manage that. As just as an artist. So that's where like your brain comes into it, and you're like, okay, well, the rhyme scheme or the moment when this word happens in this melody, those things are they come into play. So there is thought and all that, of course, that goes into the architecture. But at one point when it's over, I feel like, okay, this is done, and I would play it, and then check it the next day. So it'd have a few days where it has to like hit the spot right away, and then I'm like, okay, well, maybe somebody else will like it. That's really
Yeah.
that's really where it goes. Because like it had to,
Yeah.
kind of come from uh, both artistically and spiritually, and and then checking the boxes of you know, the standards by which I would judge music, evaluate music and say, okay, that's quality, that's hitting the mark, that's emotional, it's moving directionally in the right place. So those are subjective, but I think I'm able to sit back and say there are objective, you know, good, bad, that works, that doesn't, you got to kind of go through that. That's part of it, I think.
Yeah. And it's interesting because you were saying like it can't be cheesy. I'm thinking about the When Your Love Shines Through Me song. I could see how that could easily have gone cheesy. Um, but it doesn't because there's just so much truth there. I could see how somebody that maybe with a different spiritual background or with less spiritual grounding might feel it as cheesy, whereas to me I always feel like this is the invitation to step into this affirmation.
Sure, sure.
And most of the time I want to step into it with such joy, and I want to step into it with
Yeah,
um intention, like yes, I'm going to
yeah,
embody this truth,
yeah,
you know. um and it's that song is so, like I said earlier, it's so joyous and positive that there have been only one or two times since 2007. There have only been one or two times when I've heard that song that I've just been like, no, I can't listen. I don't buy it. Like like it's like I'm too convinced of my own suffering right now to let that into my stratosphere, you know? Um, but it was also my clue at the time of like, oh, Amy, you have some work to do,
well,
you know?
I think that's I did try to write. I mean, I think any good song, I think any song that I didn't write that I still love, there's a timeless nature to it, whether it's an old rock tune from
Yeah.
the 70s or an old standard from 30s or 40s, 1930s or 40s. So, that was part of the process was trying to make something that was timeless in terms of the message. A song like that, yes, I think it's easy to write. It's easier to write slower songs to be
Mhm.
impactful. Okay, because then you just get into that mode. No, I was thinking the audience for this is Unity Church, New Thought people.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like I was even trying to go outside a particular audience. But an up tempo song like that one. So a lot of what helps that work is the groove and the underlying beat and the style, which creates uh, an underlying more kind of subconscious effect. Okay, so you're feeling it and you're grooving along with it, and that lays the groundwork. And then now you're open for the words. So I know that the words and music have to go together. It's all that, and it could have been something else. It could have been a different groove or different style. And I worked with Alan Lett at that time, who produced the music. So my job was always just I want the song to stand on its own. If you were just playing piano and singing or playing guitar and singing, and then I'll give him some direction, like, hey, I need it to be let's get it to this thing, and he'd work his magic, and I'd come back the next day, and really 9 times out of 10, I was like, that's awesome, let's go with it. So
Yeah.
there's that component of the music part of it before and with the lyrics helps to create an energy that allows a listener to take it in. So those things go together.
So I'm curious, I'm going to use a metaphor that's usually used for women. But when we talk about creative projects, we usually put it in the paradigm of like giving birth,
Hmm.
like that we birthed
Yeah.
a creative project. So I'm curious for you, did that, for me, when I think about giving birth, like it's joyous, there's spiritual connection, but there's also contractions, it's also
Mm.
messy. Um, I'm curious, what was your experience, your creative experience, and did you feel? My assumption is that because you were writing songs of a spiritual nature, that you felt more intimate with your spirituality at the time of this, or did
Yeah.
it, or perhaps was it frustrating? Like, I'm just curious what was your creative process like?
It's probably all those things. It starts out with a little bit of an idea. You could be brushing my teeth and be like, oh, that would be cool to write a song about it. Okay, so you get this little idea, jot it down, and then my process, I know people who write songs like they'll sit down and come up with just brilliant lyrics in half an hour. So it is not like that for me. So I have the idea, and I would just start generating thoughts that go with the idea. And then maybe at some point there's enough words sitting there that I might start thinking of a melody for one of the lines if the line. So it's a process, and then this could go on for days. And sometimes
Yeah.
I would sit down, hey, I got this great idea. This line sounds really cool. It would be the title of the chorus line, or try to write. I would typically try to write my choruses first, the part that comes around over and over again. So I'd massage that into place. I might sit down at the piano, start working a melody, and then some chords. I'm like, oh, this is a good vibe. This seems cool, and then that would inform how everything else. But it's a process. So like the birth is there's the seed, the like then there's a gestation period. And that could be like a week. It could be like two
Yeah.
weeks. And then there's like this, there's that one line that's just not coming together yet. And then that may work out, or like that line needs to be fixed. And then with that affects some other things that were above it and they need to work out. So it's a process. And I would say on average, maybe a week or so until it's like, okay, this is sitting somewhere. But there's thinking about it all the time. So, I could sitting down actively writing, but then I might be driving somewhere, like trying to work that one section. It's not there yet. It's not there. Just over and over in my head, and then oh, that's the word. Sometimes it's looking for a rhyme. Okay, if there's a rhyme scheme
Yeah.
set up, and I might go to the rhyming dictionary and like, oh, duh, I hadn't had thought of that word, or that's a better word. And I need to replace the one that I had. So it's the craft part of it, uh, and the inspirational part of it is all working together. But I would say heavy on the inspiration at the beginning. Then there's craft. You know,
Mm.
you are maintaining your health, eating, taking your prenatal vitamins, and then just like keeping the craft of it in line. And moments of inspiration would come in, and then at one point it's like, I think it's done, and then let it sit for a
Yeah.
couple of days, and if it's still done in 3 days or 4 days, then it's all you can do.
Do you consider yourself a spiritual teacher?
Um,
I mean, I shouldn't have asked a yes or no
no,
question,
no,
but
it depends. I mean, I find myself in, I have a 17-year-old daughter who I try to impart some lessons to. You'll see when your daughters are 17, they may not want to hear those lessons, but uh, um, but I do. I mean, in that regard, not where I'm sitting up in front of a room, on a chair, imparting knowledge or anything, but I like to think that it's by example, or that if somebody hears a song and they get something out of it, um, then I would say that a lesson that I have learned has been shared by somebody else. I'm not administering that lesson in terms of here's a great idea, you should check this out, or this helps me, it should help you. It's more like you listen to this, and it may get you to the place where I was when it came to me, or it may get you somewhere else. So it's a little more open ended than I would say direct transmission type of teaching. In my literal piano teaching world, um, oftentimes in the process of teaching detailed musical thoughts, there's a window of uh, spirituality that comes in there in terms of teaching someone to be open to their own creativity, because that's a lot of what I teach. It's trying to teach people to be creative and
mm,
helping them get out of their own way, which is a very lofty and vague, abstract concept, but it's totally true. And so you have to kind of teach someone to trust themselves, be like, okay, well, Gary said to do this, but I don't know how to do it. And like, well, I might point them in a direction. So I would say, answer your question, indirectly so.
I've noticed that in the New Thought movement that there's lots of singing ministers, both at our church and in other churches. And so I think that there is, and I had 9 months in choir, but prior to my 9 months in choir, I was a dancer for a long time. So I
Okay.
think that there's naturally, for a lot of people, a very symbiotic relationship between spirituality and art, you know?
Yeah.
And so for me, selfishly, I listen to your album and I think, is there a blog? Is there another album? Like, where can I get some more, you know, and no pressure. I just I, I find it interesting that you have this album that in many significant but undefinable ways has helped me change my life in small moments where I was able to shift something or release something or heal something. This album has fostered me in that. And so, but normally I just see you, like, you come on stage and you play and then you leave. And so I'm like, well, what else is going on there? There's probably this well of knowledge that we're all missing out on, I feel like.
Well, I'm just a regular dude who happens to write songs. I mean, it's that album, and it's if I'm backing up a step, if you have that experience from listening to that music, then that's more than I could have asked
Mm-hmm.
for from writing that out. Because it really, what I was trying to do was I wanted to put into words and music these ideas that don't necessarily match up with music. It's hard
Mm.
to put those affirmations um, and I didn't want to say affirmations. I needed to use metaphor and I needed to dig a little deeper in terms of lyrics and I knew I had the music part of it under control, but to match the music with those ideas. So my objective was very small. I wanted to say the things I wanted to say that came through me and into me, and then I could listen back to it, and it would still be like the circular effect. And then if anybody
Yeah.
else got anything out of it, that's a bonus. So I appreciate it. But I feel like I've said, and I have written songs since then, but I think that collection for me is like I said everything I need to say about it because otherwise I'm going to start being redundant.
Yeah.
I'm
I
like,
can see
can you
that.
say the same thing? Oh, well, yes, you could, but then I would feel redundant. So that's why I'm not the most prolific songwriter. I push myself to write those songs, and in a good way. It was a good push. And
Yeah.
then the music I've written since then, there are some peripheral topics that maybe with more specificity were addressed. So there's a handful of songs that um, Ken has sung, and Michael sung a few, and when Alan was there, like something about gratitude or things. Okay, well I didn't cover that, but it's worth a little some more specificity in terms of the writing. But you know, when I'm on stage on Sunday morning, I'm waking up and going to my church job, dealing with all the various,
Yep.
traffic or, and the people on the stage and, then someone's not prepared or, I forgot something. I mean, it's just like, it's work and it's a job, which I
It's
love to
work.
do, but yeah,
Yeah.
but it's not like I'm not, it's in the grand scheme of things, it's easy work. And then I'm grateful that I have a skill set, and, uh, um, a aptitude for working with other people that allows me to, you know, do this for a living. Either it's teaching music, playing music, writing music, working with other people. So, but while I'm there, yes, I have a task at hand. And if there are moments, there are weeks when it's all task and we're just trying to get through it. And then there are moments or days when it's just like it feels really good and it's gelling, and it's
Mm.
one of those moments where just everything feels great, and we're just like, okay, that happened. And it's weird because, we all get off stage and musicians rarely ever say anything to each other after, it's just like we get off, we're like, we smile and we all go off in our, every
Yeah.
once in a while, maybe a high five or that felt good, but there's not a debrief or a, post game film,
Right.
giving you film. It's like, if it's great, we're like, uh-huh, that's it. Well, eye contact maybe, and we all go off. Or if it was horrible, we're like, we'll do better next time. So there is a an aspect to that is just about the details and what happened. but then within that, there could be a moment of like, that was awesome. And then the day's over and I go home and I, you know, go grocery shopping or whatever I need.
Yeah.
That deep.
Back to humanity.
Yep, yep.
Well, I have to say, I hadn't, because again, I don't know you that well at all. And I wanted to do, some research leading into this. So when I reached out to you months ago about doing an interview, I was like, I need to really make sure I even understand, did he really write that whole album? And so I found you on Spotify and found your Heart First album, which I did not know existed until a few moments ago. Heart First or Heart Rising? I wrote
Heart
Heart
first.
First.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
it.
And then in preparing for this, I've been, listening to the Be Revealed album, and you have a song, Live On in Me, that had never really hit my radar. And then I was like, this is kind of a mediumship song. And I have literally thought to myself, I need to write a song for people about what happens with their loved ones. Because I personally, growing up in Unity Church and New Thought, I have a very palatable definition of death, you know. Um, Whereas people that have come to me for mediumship, the amount of burden and devastation that they have, a lot of times to me is rooted in what their ideas are about death and the afterlife.
Mm-hmm.
And I always wish that there was like something I could give them aside from whatever is going to come through me in the reading, something that I could give them to hold on to or to like, and I know there's books and stuff out there, but it didn't hit me just this week. I was listening to the album and I was listening to Live On in Me and I was like, he already wrote it. Like
Well,
it's
that
already done.
actually, to be perfectly honest with you, that's the one song that I did not write the lyrics to. I wrote the music to it, and then a
Okay.
friend of mine, a high school friend of mine, who's credited on the album, Dean is his name. Uh, when I was living in Chicago, we reunited after I'd been living in. I lived in Miami for like 8 to 10 years, and when I moved back to Chicago, we linked back up, and we're writing a number of songs together, pop songs. And that was a
Yeah.
song where so I would write the music, and then I'd give him a cassette back in those days, so ancient
Uh-huh.
days. And then we get together in a few days, and he'd be like, "Here are the lyrics I came up with." Okay, so I had written that whole thing on piano, and then he
Wow.
wrote these lyrics to it, and he said, "Here's the idea." It's he had a visual in his head of a woman sitting on a beach whose son was, and it wasn't even, he had died. He was just in another country and was never going to come. It was like, so he had, I think that's how it went. So he had a vision in his head of how it would look as if it was in a musical or something.
Mm,
So I held on to that because I knew that song had a deeper message than just, a pop song that was part of the other songs that we were writing. So I have to give
yeah.
credit to my friend Dean for that. So for the lyrics.
Yeah,
Yeah,
please let him know. I felt
absolutely.
like it was when we were talking earlier about your song Let Me and you were saying like
Hmm.
this could be a parent, this could be source. I feel like it was the same thing with Live
Hmm.
On in Me. It's like it's not
Yes.
necessarily about a loved one that passes
Right.
on, but it totally could be,
Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
yes, yeah.
Um it's yeah, it's beautiful and I'm so glad that cuz I'm a creature of habit.
Mhm.
Um, and so I just go to the same 4 or 5 songs all the time. But in preparing for this, I was like, oh, I'm going to listen to his piano music. I'm going to make sure I listen to the whole album. And so when I heard Live On in Me, I was like, get out of town. Like, how did this not hit my radar before?
Uh,
Um, and it is, there's a lyric in there, and I didn't write it down, but there's a lyric in there about like, I close my eyes and then I feel you, or then you're with me, or something. Um, that is from a spiritual perspective, it's like, yes, that could be just somebody that we're thinking of. That could be a
right.
loved one. That could be an angel. Like that could be so many things. But it's just helpful to have that reminder.
Yeah.
And here's the other thing I really like about this album. It's just that the music is good. You know, Like, there's a lot of good music out there in the world, and then there's a lot of really meaningful lyrics out there in the world, and sometimes those two things don't coexist.
Hmm. Yeah,
But
yeah.
this album is just it's enjoyable to listen to on top of being so meaningful,
Well,
you
thank you.
know?
We were going for quality,
Yeah,
on all
yes.
aspects, and I do give a lot of credit to. I mean, Alan let he created the sound that you hear. The choice of the instruments, and I mean the the production. What you hear is as the soundscape and all that was really Alan putting that together. It was really
Yeah.
great. So I went in there with you know piano and lyrics, and Ken would sing, and then Alan would build the production around it, and then Ken would sometimes come back and re-sing some things. But as I recall, Ken did a lot of first and second takes, so he nailed a lot of it right off the bat. So,
That is another question I have for you real quick because I know
mhm.
we're going to wrap up soon, but with eh, artists, do you ever get inspired by an artist's voice? Like do you ever like at Unity Houston, we have Julie Laskowski, we have Siobhan Jacobs, Tony Glover, Boris Britt. Like, do you ever hear some of their voices in your mind and think, oh, like there might be a mess, you know? How
Sure,
does that
sure.
work for you? Sorry.
With with I try to write the songs so that anybody could play it or anybody could
Anybody.
sing it. It could be on
Yeah.
piano or guitar. So I always start with that. It's got to be good first. It's got to have meet all the standards and pass the tests. Um, uh, but once I started working with Ken, and he's got an operatic voice, so a lot of that
He's
that
freaking
right,
incredible.
right. So it's a weird
Yeah.
match anyway with operatic voice on top of like this pop music, and it kind of became its own thing because
Uh-huh.
we were just doing it. So it kind of
Right.
became a thing that I had not planned on in advance. It just turned into that. So once that when that CD was all finished up, and I had written more songs after that, then I was thinking, okay, well, yeah, I can imagine Ken singing it. Then it did inform how I was thinking about writing it. So then I had to kind of uh, separate that and think, okay, this is how Ken would sound because I could hear it in my head on singing on this. But what if there was a woman singing, or what if somebody was younger was singing it? I still put it through that filter of will it work in all situations? So.
Yeah. Yeah, Ken Gale is just out of this world. I mean, literally, like, I'm like, are you an alien, dude? Like, this is too good.
Yeah,
He's so great.
totally.
Yeah. Um, uh, what was the other thing? I guess that answered that question. Um, okay, let me ask you just a behind the scenes artist question because there's a lot of people that listen to the podcast that are not in Houston and do not have the luxury of hearing any of this live on a Sunday.
Hmm.
Um, as an artist, where do you get the most benefit if somebody buys it on iTunes, if they listen on Spotify? Should they go to, do you have a website? Like, where do you get the most benefit from this? I know Ken is on Spotify, it's under Ken's name, but
Yeah, I mean, it's the benefit if you're speaking financially is so minimal at this point.
yeah.
So wherever anybody could find it, I don't have a website. I'm not even on social media, so I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna off the grid mostly. But if it's wherever it can be found, I think it originally was we had it on Amazon, Apple Music, and um, CD Baby, which existed back in the day. But I think Spotify. Um, is probably the
Yeah.
best place to get it. Um, yeah, and or they can buy hard copies of the CD in the Unity bookstore. Or they could order from there. Uh, but yeah, it's.
Yeah.
I wish I had a better answer for you, but it's so
Well,
long ago.
yeah.
That if
Well, no, the truth is the truth. And
anyone can
I
find
like to
it.
ask because for people that are,
Sure.
yeah, for people that aren't in music, it's like we don't know, you know, if
Yeah,
it makes a
yeah, yeah.
significant difference or not.
Sure.
Um, well, is there anything else that you would like to share, either about your music or about the creative process? Just anything else that I didn't ask that you wish I had asked?
I think we've covered quite a bit. I mean, the creative process
Yeah.
is is always uh, anytime I create or uh, it's going well, it's always a reminder that that's how it happens. It's not from forcing it. So if you know if and then that's the same thing I would tell anybody who's trying to be creative, that you have to have a skill set and you're building that skill set all the time, but that you have to take chances creatively, try something. So which is a large part of being creative is trying something. And if it doesn't work, we'll pivot and go somewhere else. So I would say that if I were to talk about the creative process, it's a balance of taking those chances and being open to something coming in that you did not expect. And
Yeah.
you can't always
Mm.
calculate. You can't always make that. You can't always say, okay, now I'm open. Where is it? Okay, so it's not like that. So it's just
That's
you
exactly
can't.
what I do.
Yeah, like hello. So it's just it's you kind of put yourself in the zone. Sometimes you find yourself in the zone and you least expect it, and that's I would say more often than not that's how it works for me. So it's being
Mm.
available and trying to create situations where you're available.
Yeah. That's such a helpful reminder and a lovely note to end the podcast on. And I just want to say thank you again. I know it's been so long, but I truly feel like you created, I don't know if archetypes or perspectives or reminders, but your songs are like characters in my world that pop in when I need them, and I wish I was talented enough to sing them. I wish I was talented enough to write them, but I will
Aw,
appreciate I'll appreciate what I can get from them nonetheless. So,
thank you. That's so kind of you. I appreciate
thank
it.
you so much, Gary. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All
All
right,
right.
you have a good one. All right, bye.